The first time Kieran saw her, she was standing in the middle of the self-help section at the university bookstore, holding a paperback like it might burn her fingers. The fluorescent lights above didn't flatter anyone, but she wasn't hiding. She looked at the books like she hated every single one of them, and maybe herself too. Not in a loud way, quietly, with dignity. The kind that wears tailored linen shirts and reads the back covers anyway, because something in her still hoped. That's what caught him. She didn't move like people his age did, trying to impress, performing aliveness. She moved like someone who had lived long enough to be bored of pretending. She was all structured, clean lines, sharp cheekbones, her hair tied up like a statement, but underneath that, she was tired, and maybe ready to crack. To him, she was imperfect, and that made her alive. Kieran wasn't supposed to be in that aisle. He was supposed to be upstairs, running the student literary journal meeting, but he'd lied and said he had a migraine. The truth was, he'd been avoiding everyone since his last poem was published anonymously in the winter issue, the one about his father's arrest, the one that hit a little too hard for people who knew him. He wasn't in the mood to be looked at like a sob story, so he came here, to the quiet shelves with the books that pretended to fix people. She didn't see him at first. Her phone buzzed once, and she frowned without checking it. He watched her lift a book, Resilient Women, Reluctant Hearts, and then put it back, almost gently, like it was a gift she couldn't afford to accept. That was when he spoke, without thinking. "You won't find anything real in that one," he said, nodding toward the shelf. "It's all written by people who haven't been broken properly." She turned slowly, not startled. Just curious. Her eyes, gray, cold, a little tired, moved over him like she was assessing whether he was worth the words. "And how would you know what properly broken looks like?" she asked, with a dry kind of elegance that hit him in the chest. He shrugged. "Because I write better when I am." That made her laugh, the smallest thing. More breath than sound. But it was real. Her lips curled at the edges, then dropped again like she'd remembered she wasn't supposed to enjoy anything today. He stepped closer, not too close. Close enough for her to smell the coffee on his breath and the rain in his hoodie. "Look," he said, scanning the shelf and pulling down a thin book, cracked at the spine. "Try this. The author's a fraud, but he's good at bleeding on paper." She took the book from him without touching his hand, her nails painted a burnt red that matched the flecks in her scarf. She glanced at the title, To Ache quietly, then raised an eyebrow. "And you're recommending this, why?" "Because you look like you want to scream, but you haven't found the right room yet." She blinked once. That was the moment. That precise flicker in her face, a nerve exposed for half a second before the armor returned. And then something unthinkable happened, she smiled. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't practiced. It was messy and lopsided and made her look younger and older at the same time. She shook her head like she regretted the smile already and turned back toward the cashier. He didn't follow her. He stood there in the aisle, heartbeat louder than it should be, wondering what the hell just happened. Wondering if she would read the book, if she would remember his face. Wondering if she would come back. She did. 3 days later, she was in the cafe across the street from campus, reading the book he'd given her. She wasn't trying to hide it, either. The cover was bare on the table, her coffee untouched. She didn't look around like she wanted to be seen. She sat like someone who didn't expect anything from the world anymore, but was still willing to sit in it. He slid into the chair across from her without asking. "I take it you found the right room?" he asked, lifting his eyebrows. She looked up slowly, not surprised this time. She studied him like a professor studies a student who shows promise but no discipline. Her lips twitched again. "You're not subtle," she said. "That line about the room?" It was rehearsed. "Maybe," he said, leaning in. But it worked. She closed the book and tapped it once, firmly. "This is garbage, by the way." "I know. But the last paragraph?" She paused. "I read it 3 times. That's the one about grief tasting like metal?" She nodded. "And smoke. And lemon." There was a silence between them then, not awkward, not tentative, but full of something raw. He liked it. He hadn't felt this awake in weeks. He extended his hand across the table. Kieran. She looked at it, then him. Elena. The touch was brief, but he felt it all the way through his ribs. She pulled back quickly, like she regretted that too. He could have left it there. But he didn't. What do you do? He asked. I'm a ghost, she said. Then added, after a beat, architect. Semi-retired. You design things no one sees? That's the goal. He laughed. She didn't. But she watched him. You're not a student, she said, more statement than question. He smirked. Technically, I am. Masters in English Lit. Also technically broke. Young and tragic. Old enough to choose it. That made her look away. He didn't push. She stood up after a minute and slid the book across the table toward him. Keep your bleeding paperbacks, she said. But thank you. For what? For the room. She left before he could respond. He watched her go, the red scarf trailing behind her like a signature. He didn't know it then, but that would be the last time they saw each other as strangers. What came next wasn't romance. It wasn't flirtation. It was the slow, awkward formation of a secret that neither of them intended to keep but couldn't quite kill either. The next time they met, it wasn't accidental. It was her, waiting at the back of a poetry reading he was doing on campus. She stood in the shadows like she wasn't sure why she came. But she stayed the whole time. Afterward, she didn't say anything. Just handed him a note that read, in sharp handwriting, "What if I'd been looking for a room and never realized I was already in it?" She left before he could answer. But that was all he needed. And so it began: clandestine coffees, long walks through places where no one would know her, or care. Conversations in parked cars. Jokes whispered in the dark. Their age difference was never spoken out loud, but it hovered over every glance, every pause. To the world, she was a woman who'd seen too much. To him, she was the first person who made it feel like all his flaws were notes in a song instead of red flags. She didn't tell him about her divorce. Not yet. He didn't tell her about the poem. They didn't owe each other the past. Not yet. But it was coming. All of it. Elena didn't belong in the places they met. She didn't fit between the mold-stained walls of Kieran's apartment or the clatter of cheap dishes in the late-night diners they hid in. Her coat always looked out of place on the plastic booth seat, and her perfume lingered longer than they did. He noticed things no one else did: the way she checked her phone but never responded to messages, how she refused to sit with her back to the door, how her silence wasn't empty but sharp-edged. She didn't speak much about herself unless prompted, and when she did, she measured her words like they cost her something. Kieran, on the other hand, poured everything out because he didn't know how to be cautious. He talked about his father's trial, how the local news printed his last name in bold letters after the conviction, how the whispers on campus didn't say his name but always said "you know who." He told her he'd stopped going home for holidays because his mother couldn't look at him without seeing a timeline of mistakes. He told her his last relationship ended when she found out about his family's history and told him he had too much baggage for someone so young. Elena didn't say anything cruel in response. She only said she was wrong. The baggage isn't the problem. It's when you try to make someone carry it with you without asking. They never talked about what they were doing. There were no labels, no demands. He never asked why she kept coming back, and she never asked why he didn't try to make her leave. That was the unspoken deal between them. Until the letter arrived. It was left in his campus mailbox, a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sentence, typed in bold black letters: "You should know who you're being seen with." No signature. No context. But Kieran knew exactly what it meant. The timing wasn't random. A week earlier, they had gone to an exhibit at the City Museum, her idea, a weekday afternoon when the place was half empty and quiet. She had touched his arm while talking about an old sculpture, nothing overt, nothing public, but enough for someone watching to guess. He hadn't noticed anyone familiar there, but clearly someone had noticed them. He kept the letter folded in his pocket all day, reading it over and over like the words might change. That night, he told her about it. She didn't flinch when he handed her the paper. She read it twice, then set it down on the table without comment. "Do you recognize the handwriting?" she asked. "It's typed," he said. Cowardly, she replied. "But not surprising." Kieran leaned forward, his voice low. "You think it's someone from your world or mine?" "Both," she said. "Neither. Someone who thinks they're doing you a favor, probably." He wanted to ask if this had happened to her before, but something in her expression warned him not to. Her posture had changed, straight back, shoulders squared, like she was preparing for a hearing or a confrontation. She took a long breath, then looked at him directly. "Do you want to stop this?" He didn't answer right away because he hadn't thought of it as something that could be ended with a decision. It wasn't a thing with a beginning or middle or end, just a presence that grew between them. "No," he said finally. "But I don't want it to destroy you either." Her voice was even. "It won't. That already happened." That was the first time he asked about her past. The story came in pieces. She had been married for 12 years. Her husband had been respected, well-paid, charming when he needed to be. He had also been obsessed with appearances, with control, with winning conversations the way other men win arguments. She stayed because that's what was expected, and she left when staying became worse than the fallout. The divorce wasn't messy in court but brutal in private. Friends chose sides, and most didn't choose hers. Family said all the wrong things. One of her siblings stopped speaking to her. She rebuilt her life in stages, first her career, then her schedule, then her voice. But there were still rooms she avoided, still songs she skipped, still moments when silence felt safer than honesty. She didn't cry while telling him this. Her voice didn't even shake. But when she finished, she looked out the window like she expected the story to echo. Kieran wanted to tell her something important, something anchoring, but all he could say was, "They don't deserve you." She turned to him and said, "Neither do you. But at least you know it." That night, he didn't try to kiss her. He walked her to her car and stood outside until she drove off, headlights disappearing into the dark like proof she had been there at all. The next few days on campus were different. People looked at him longer than usual. A girl he used to tutor mentioned rumors about faculty getting too friendly with students, even though Elena didn't work there. A professor paused too long when calling attendance and glanced at Kieran like he was a question no one wanted to answer. He started taking the long route to class. He deleted social media apps from his phone. He stopped going to his favorite coffee spot on Tuesdays because that's when most of the lit students gathered. He didn't see Elena that week, but they exchanged brief messages, neutral ones, careful ones, until the last one from her read, "We need to talk in person. I don't want this to be managed like a crisis." When he arrived at her house for the first time, it didn't look like what he imagined. It wasn't extravagant, not sterile. Books on every surface. Photos of places, not people. An unfinished painting on the floor. She opened the door barefoot, in jeans and a plain shirt, like someone who didn't want to be seen but had stopped trying to hide. She let him in without speaking. In her kitchen, the letter sat pinned to the fridge with a magnet that read, "Nothing real is ever safe." She poured tea but didn't drink any. "This is the part," she said, "where people usually back out. They say something like, 'This is too complicated,' or 'maybe we rushed into this.'" "I'm not saying that," Kieran said. "You should," she replied. "But I'm not." The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but full. Then she said, "Someone knows. That's not going away. I don't care. You will." He didn't argue. He stepped closer. "Then we find out who sent it. We deal with it. And if it's someone we can't confront?" He looked at her like she was the only person in the world. "Then we let them watch." She looked at him for a long time. And finally, she nodded once. But outside, someone had already started talking. Kieran started noticing the changes not in people's words but in how they hesitated before speaking. Conversations that used to feel natural began to carry attention, like everyone was weighing the cost of what they said. In class, when he raised his hand, professors paused before calling on him, and other students looked down at their notebooks. It wasn't open judgment, it was something slower and more passive, something that couldn't be fought directly. The worst of it wasn't anger or confrontation. It was the quiet refusal to meet his eyes, the subtle shift in tone that said, "You've made yourself into something people can't talk to anymore." He didn't need to ask anyone what they'd heard. He could see it in how his roommate no longer asked about his weekend plans, in how his classmates stopped tagging him in group chats, in how one of the lit journal editors emailed him privately to say they were re-evaluating the editorial tone for next semester. He didn't tell Elena all of this right away. When they met now, it was always in places that didn't ask questions: unlit parking lots, late walks through the outskirts of the park, sometimes her car parked behind his building, engine off and music playing at low volume. They didn't call it hiding, but that's what it was. At night, they talked about everything else: books she hated, the people who used to matter to her, the jobs she turned down because she couldn't stand working under people who used their power like a weapon. He told her about his brother, who barely spoke to him now, about the last time his mother called and asked if he was still wasting time on that older woman, as if Elena didn't have a name. They didn't talk about the future. They didn't talk about labels. But sometimes, in the pauses between stories, there was an admission buried in the way she reached for his hand or the way he turned his phone off when he was with her. One night, he told her he hadn't written anything in weeks, and she asked him why, and he said, "Because I don't know who I'm writing for anymore." She looked at him and said, "Then maybe stop trying to impress the people who already decided they're not listening." He spent more time at her house after that, usually late, always quiet. She would cook enough for two without asking if he'd stay, and he would clean up without asking if she wanted him to. They had stopped pretending it was temporary, but they also didn't try to define what it was. Elena never asked about his friends, and he never asked about the names that came up on her phone but never stayed on screen long enough to read. One night, while folding laundry on her living room floor, she asked if he wanted to see her old work, the blueprints and models and sketches she kept in the spare room. He said yes. She led him to the room without speaking, flicked on the light, and let him walk around the scattered drafts and half-built models. He moved slowly, careful not to touch anything without her permission. The walls were covered in graphite and ink lines that had once been part of real buildings, or failed proposals, or just ideas she never had the time or nerve to finish. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, not watching him so much as bracing herself for whatever he would say. He turned and asked, "Why'd you stop?" She didn't hesitate. "Because I hated what it made me." He looked around again. "But this is brilliant." She didn't argue. It didn't matter. What they wanted wasn't brilliance. They wanted obedience. "I didn't give it to them." He nodded slowly. "Do you regret it?" "I regret pretending I didn't." That was the first time she let him stay the night without asking. The witness came 2 days later. They were walking out of the film center downtown, having caught the last screening of a documentary she had wanted to see. It was dark, close to midnight, and the street was mostly empty. They weren't holding hands, but their bodies moved close together in a way that didn't need explanation. Kieran was mid-sentence when a man walked past them from the opposite direction and stopped just long enough to do a double take. Kieran recognized him instantly: second-year law student, part of the student government, the kind of person who thrived on networking and rumors. The guy stared for a second too long before continuing down the sidewalk without saying anything. Elena noticed the shift in Kieran's voice immediately. "Who was that?" she asked. "Someone who talks more than he listens." "Should we be worried?" "I don't know. But I doubt he was out here for the documentary." They didn't say anything else on the drive back. Elena kept both hands on the wheel, and Kieran stared out the window, watching streetlights flicker past like questions he didn't want to answer. When they reached her house, she didn't turn off the car right away. She kept the engine running and looked straight ahead. "This won't blow over," she said quietly. "I know. He'll tell someone. He probably already has. Let them talk." It doesn't work like that for me. You can fade into another semester. I can't fade at all. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back. Not because I don't want to, she said. Because if someone sees, it becomes a different story. It becomes something I didn't agree to. He didn't respond. He knew she wasn't wrong. She shut off the engine. You should go. Not because I want you to, but because I don't know what tomorrow looks like anymore. He got out of the car, but he didn't walk away. He waited by the sidewalk until she locked the door behind her. Then he pulled out his phone and searched the student government roster until he found the name of the guy who'd seen them. He stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the message button, but he didn't press send. Inside, Elena stood alone in the hallway, hand resting on the wall, breathing slowly, waiting for the phone call that hadn't come yet but would. The conference was not the place where anything was supposed to happen. It was the kind of event that filled auditoriums with overlit panels and self-important introductions, a place where people came to be seen applauding the right keynote speakers and exchanging business cards they'd forget to follow up on. Kieran had been invited because one of his professors wanted to showcase his recent essay on contemporary criticism and identity, and Elena was there because she had quietly rejoined a former architectural review board that had ties to the university. Neither of them knew the other would be present until he walked into the hallway outside the main hall and saw her standing by a table of glossy brochures, dressed in a dark suit that made her look sharper than usual, expression unreadable. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. He could feel the eyes of others in the room, the people who recognized him, the students who had heard enough to fill in blanks, and the faculty who never commented but always watched. She didn't move toward him, and he didn't expect her to. He nodded once and turned away, walking toward the side of the room where name tags were arranged alphabetically. His hands stayed clenched at his sides. He didn't need to say anything. The damage was already in motion. By midday, it was clear that someone had decided today was the right day to make the whispers louder. A professor in the English department who had always smiled too much was overheard asking a colleague if the university had rules about faculty partners attending student panels. A pair of graduate assistants whispered just a little too loudly near the refreshment table, comparing details that didn't sound speculative anymore. And when Kieran checked his phone during the break, he found a message from a classmate that read, "Someone posted about you and her. You might want to get ahead of it." He didn't open the link. He didn't need to. The specifics didn't matter. The tone would be clear enough. Older woman, younger man, secret meetings, professional lines blurred. The kind of accusations that didn't need proof to do damage. When he found Elena again, she was standing in the back of the exhibition room, staring at a design proposal displayed on one of the tall boards. Her jaw was tight. Her posture had changed. She didn't turn when he approached. "Have you seen it?" he asked quietly. She nodded once. "I got the same link." He waited. She didn't speak. He stepped closer. "We can leave," he said. "And then what?" she asked. "We let them talk. We let them get bored. They won't get bored. Not with me." He exhaled. "You didn't do anything wrong. Doesn't matter. I'm not the student. I'm not the one people will forgive after graduation." A pause stretched between them. She turned to look at him directly for the first time that day. "We didn't think this through. We didn't plan anything," he said. "That's not the same." "It is, to them. There's no way to tell a story like ours without it sounding like something broken." Kieran stared at her, waiting for something he couldn't name, maybe a confirmation that this wasn't the end. But she only said, "You're about to read in front of people who already think they know your whole story. And I'm not walking out of here just so they can say it's true." "Then what do? We let them look. But we don't flinch." Later, when Kieran stepped onto the stage to read his piece, the auditorium felt quieter than usual. Not in a respectful way. It was the kind of silence that waits to see if someone will collapse. He adjusted the mic. He looked down at the printed essay, then up at the faces in front of him. Some students leaned forward. One faculty member stared without blinking. Someone in the back pulled out a phone, already filming. He didn't read what he had prepared. Instead, he said, "You already think you know what I'm going to say. Some of you think you know who I've been with. Maybe you do. But you don't know why. You don't know what silence does to people who were never given the benefit of the doubt. You don't know what it means to be seen not as a person but as a rumor, and how quickly people stop asking questions once they believe they've figured you out. So no, I won't read the essay. Because what matters now isn't whether I can write cleanly about identity. It's whether I can live through the version of myself you've already created." He stepped back. He left the paper on the podium and walked off stage. No one applauded. No one interrupted. It was worse than that. It was the stillness that comes before a decision, collective, silent, unspoken. Elena was waiting for him outside the side exit. She looked at him without smiling. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I don't know. You said what you needed to say." "Did I?" She nodded. "But they're going to make you pay for it anyway." "And you?" "I've already paid." They stood outside the building while the noise inside began to rise again. No one came looking for them. No one asked them to return. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. For the first time, they stood together where everyone could see. No one walked past them, but Kieran knew they were being watched. Elena squeezed his hand once before letting go. "I'm not sure what comes next," she said. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Neither of them looked back when they walked away from the building. 3 days after the conference, Kieran received an email from the department chair. The subject line was vague, just his name and the word student conduct. The message itself was short. A formal review had been requested. Not by name, but by implication. He was expected to attend a hearing to clarify boundaries and preserve the integrity of academic spaces. It didn't mention Elena. It didn't have to. He read it twice before closing his laptop and sitting back in the chair without moving. His phone buzzed beside him, but he didn't reach for it. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't angry, wasn't afraid, wasn't even tired. He just felt finished. Not in a dramatic sense, but in the way someone feels when the road finally ends and there's no longer any question about whether to keep going. When he finally stood, it wasn't to get dressed or to pack or to prepare. It was just to leave. He walked without checking the time, left the apartment door unlocked, passed 2 people from his building without saying anything, and arrived at Elena's house without warning. She opened the door slowly, wearing a plain sweater and jeans, no shoes, no makeup, her hair pulled back loosely like she'd given up on controlling the day. "I got the email," he said. She stepped aside and let him in. He didn't sit. Neither did she. "They want me to explain something that doesn't belong in their version of what a student is supposed to be," he said. "They're not even pretending it's about my work." She didn't ask what he was going to do. She just looked at him and said, "You knew this was coming." "Yeah. But I thought it would feel more like a choice." Elena crossed her arms, then uncrossed them. She walked toward the window and stood there, not looking out, just standing still. "I had a meeting yesterday," she said. "They said the review board's relationship with alumni faculty has to be re-evaluated. That means you. That means they want to distance themselves." Kieran nodded. "Because of me?" "No," she said. "Because of what people think of you with me." He stepped toward her but didn't reach out. "So what happens now?" She turned, leaning against the frame. "We get to decide whether it's worth it." He was quiet for a long moment. "Is it?" "I don't know," she said. "I wish I could say yes like it solves something. But we're not in a place where the truth fixes anything. It just exposes us." He didn't argue. He didn't ask her to fight for it. He sat down on the edge of her couch, elbows on his knees, looking at the floor. "I think I loved you," he said. "I don't know if I was supposed to say it first, or ever. But I think I did. Maybe I still do. She didn't react right away. Then she came and sat across from him, her posture rigid, voice low. You don't need to love me to prove something. I'm not trying to. And I'm not asking you to, she said. But you need to understand that love doesn't protect people like us. Not in the way you want it to. Then what does? Silence. Distance. Denial. That's how people like us survive these things. He nodded once. Then we're not people like that. Her voice broke for the first time. Maybe we should be. The room stayed quiet after that. Not out of awkwardness, but out of inevitability. Neither of them reached for the other. Neither tried to hold on. There was no grand decision, no speech, no question. Just the slow unraveling of something that had never been simple. When he stood to leave, she didn't walk him to the door. She stayed seated, eyes fixed on the window. As he stepped outside, she called his name once. He turned. I wasn't ashamed of you, she said. Not once. Even when I should have been. Even when it would have made everything easier. He gave her the smallest nod. That's the only thing that matters. She didn't answer. The hearing took place the following week. Kieran sat in a small room with 4 faculty members and 1 administrator, none of whom mentioned Elena directly. The questions were carefully worded, phrases like inappropriate familiarity, ethical proximity, public perception. He answered clearly, honestly, without apology. He did not name her. He did not defend her. He made it clear that anything that happened between them had not happened within a classroom, had not involved coercion, had not affected his grades, had not violated policy as written. But he knew that wasn't what they cared about. When they asked him if he thought continuing his enrollment was compatible with the university's expectations, he said, that depends on what you're really expecting. They thanked him. They dismissed him. He walked out without asking what the outcome would be. A week later, he received notice that his status would remain unchanged, but he was expected to avoid professional entanglements and non-academic reputational risks in the future. He read the letter once, deleted it, and didn't tell anyone. He never saw Elena on campus again. He heard later that she had declined her seat on the review board, citing scheduling conflicts. No one mentioned the rumors anymore. New stories replaced them, and the people who once whispered about him moved on to other targets. In the months that followed, Kieran wrote again. Not about her, not directly. But her presence lived in the rhythm of certain lines, in the sharpness of moments he didn't try to smooth out. He didn't date. He didn't explain. He carried her absence like something he wasn't willing to lose completely. One evening, after submitting a manuscript to a journal he respected, he walked past the bookstore where he first met her. The shelf where they spoke was still there. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. Later that night, he received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a short note in handwriting he recognized instantly. It read, "Some rooms are meant to be left behind, even if they were the only place you felt real. But thank you for making me feel alive again. For a while." There was no name. He folded the note, placed it in a drawer, and turned off the light. The question remained, but he no longer needed the answer.